Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is our friend Phui Yi Kong, who's from Malaysia and a recent grad from Bowdoin College. Welcome to the show, Phui Yi.
Thanks, Bruce. Glad to be here.
Good to have you here. Tell us about Malaysia. Most people never heard of it or don't even know where it is.
That's true. I always say Malaysia is in Southeast Asia. So you go from Vietnam down the coast, and then you reach Thailand, if you're with me, and then you reach the main peninsula of Malaysia. If you go a little further, at the tip of that peninsula is Singapore, so that gives you an idea of where we're in the world. If you know where Singapore, Indonesia, or Philippines is, you are right in the neck of the woods of Malaysia. And it's very different than Maine. It only has pretty much one season because we're near the equator, so no snow, no leaves changing, just
hot.
Rainy or hot.
It's hot?
It's quite hot.
Yeah. And what's the ethnic composition of Malaysia?
Malaysia is quite interesting in that it has 60% Malay population, 20%.
Malay are the indigenous people?
Malay are an ethnic group called the Malays, and they can be said to come from all over the surrounding islands before all these nations were formed in the 20th century. And so Malay would be something like saying, okay, this is one ethnic group, like saying Chinese is one ethnic group. So there's 60% Malays, 20% Chinese, 15% South Asian, so Indian, and a small fraction are, we call original people, or you would call them Aboriginals.
And your own family was Chinese?
Yes, my great-grandparents came from China. They were brought in by the British as probably indentured laborers to serve on the tin mines through Singapore, because that was a very prime hub of labor in the world at that point for the British colony. And so through the generations, we've become Malaysians. We don't really identify as being Chinese nationals. We are Malaysians of Chinese descent.
All right. Well, you came to Maine to go to Bowdoin. What was it like for you to arrive in Maine? Very different place, I'm sure, when you first came to college.
Yeah, the first day I got off the plane, I was picked up by two young, very handsome Bowdoin lads, and they were driving me, and I was very late, so I was the only one in the van because my flight had a couple of delays. There was an earthquake that day as well, so a shaky arrival. And I was coming through Portland and up the coast, and I just remember thinking, wow, this is really beautiful. There are all these marshes. And we were driving so smoothly that I asked the two students, I said, is this how traffic usually is in Maine? Like, we haven't stopped. And they said, yeah, there are no traffic jams in Maine.
Compared to?
Compared to a lot of other places in the world.
Yeah. What made you ultimately, once you got settled into Bowdoin, what made you feel like you belonged in this community in Maine?
I think that's a hard one because I think students come to college with set expectations, really wanting to fit in, and sometimes you're so excited about meeting new people and connecting that you really miss that connection because you're trying too hard. So I think on campus, I was trying too hard and I really wanted a different approach. And so I found myself during my first year Thanksgiving down in Portland with the Occupy movement encampment there. And I had been inspired to go there because I had read on my Facebook wall a theater mentor of mine in Seattle said that he had just returned from the Occupy movement in Zuccotti Park. The movement's very real. This is a message to any theater of the oppressed, which is the type of theater that I was learning at that point. Any theater of the oppressed practitioners, please go to your nearest Occupy movement and conduct theater of the oppressed activities, because it only helps strengthen the message of the movement. So I found myself in Portland eating turkey in November 2011
At the park in Portland, Maine.
at Lincoln Park in Portland, Maine.
And so you stayed with Occupy.
Yeah.
Were you the only Bowdoin student?
At that point in Portland, I couldn't find any other Bowdoin student who was down there.
What did you learn from that experience? And maybe give a little more, some more stories from that experience.
I learned a lot. It was the first time I felt that any group was inclusive to a lot of different worldviews, and that people really made an effort to listen to how someone was different than they were. And naturally, when you are open to new possibilities, some chaos emerges, some uncertainty emerges. And so this Occupy group was trying through a lot of mutual understanding to know how to work together in a way that would get money out of politics. So you can immediately see how difficult the task was to come together from all walks of life. People who were homeless, people who had just been laid off, people who were co-op owners in downtown, people who were lawyers. They all came together and tried to work something out. And I find that very remarkable for the American society to have such a space created.
But, you know, I just think of you, okay, you're just arriving at college, you're new. How old were you at the time?
I was quite an old college student. I was 20 at the time.
20, okay. It's still not so old.
True. Yeah, I remember, yes, we're in Maine now.
Yeah, compared to me or everyone else in the studio, 20 is pretty young.
Yeah.
So here you are, sitting down with all these people, and you're taking a position of leadership by doing some teaching of theater of the oppressed. I just can't conceive of it. You know, you're from another country. I mean, I wouldn't use the word presumptuous, because it wasn't presumptuous, but it was bold. But it didn't dawn on you that it was bold. You just did it, right?
Yeah, it was important for me to connect with people in ways that were genuine. So I found this theater to be a means of, like a gift, like an offering. I said, I came to the movement and immediately I asked people, why are you here? What are people doing? How has it been? And I heard a lot of mixed views about how amazing it was to come out and protest with people and feel a sense of community with others. And I heard people being really dismayed that the group couldn't function well enough for there to be sustainable impact. And so immediately I was doing a lot of listening and trying to work together with people. And I don't really know how I did it, but there was a lot of grit and a lot of is it not preservation? What's the word for perseverance? A lot of perseverance involved in participating in a way that I could bring some of my strengths and gifts and talents to the table. So looking back, I think it was bold, but I think it also came from a place of necessity.
And what did you? Was there anything that surprised you in that process? You know, you're in a new country and political situation very different than your own home. Anything surprise you about what was going on in that whole mix at that time?
It was very shocking that there would be people who were incredibly articulate, but also dysfunctional. And I couldn't quite understand how people could be so educated, yet feel some sense of emptiness inside. For example, there were people who could articulate why the system was corrupt, but couldn't work well with other people. And I thought there was such a gap there must have been a gap in either this person's life or their upbringing, or just the way the system is treating people. So I thought there were a lot of red flags in the
What was your
United States
conclusion
system.
about the reason for that?
I think it has to do with the way institutions, maybe you can see the government as an institution, Bowdoin as an institution, banks are institutions, the way institutions treat people.
In America?
In the United States.
What do you mean?
I think there's a sense of neglect, very instantaneous neglect if somebody is not good enough. There's a sense that people are let go if they don't show certain qualities, like they don't meet the needs of
certain
the
value.
institution.
They don't appear to have any value, for example.
Yeah, they don't. I think they don't have the value that the institution wants them to have, and I think that's okay, but there's not enough space that says you are okay as you are, and you belong here. I don't think that message is fostered enough amongst these institutions, which are very, in some ways, very influential,
dominant
in the community. And in some ways, I would appreciate the word dominant, because it seems like corporations in the United States, this kind of corporate mentality, dominates over the voice that appreciates life, that appreciates nature.
It reminds me of a story of Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull, one of the great Lakota warriors and medicine men out in South Dakota in the late 1860s, brought onto the reservation, and he got hooked up with the Wild West show and was touring the big cities on the East Coast. And one day he was sitting on a door stoop in New York City, and a bunch of street kids, what I'd call street urchins, came up surrounding him, begging for money and everything else. And he apparently gave away almost all the money he earned in the Wild West show. He gave it to the kids because he felt so bad for them. But when he got home, he told the people in Lakota, in South Dakota, he told them on the reservation, we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble. You should see how the white man treats his children. Anybody that treats their children, doesn't take care of their children, doesn't feed their children, doesn't house their children, just abandons them to the street. Any culture that does that, we're in big trouble. And I think that's the reality of America. Let me ask you another question. Let's talk about your own education and your work since graduating from Bowdoin last year. You got a fellowship that allowed you to travel around the world. But you've been remarkably different from most Bowdoin students because you've worked so much with local community groups off campus. We talked a little bit about that. But go into this whole thing a little more, would you please?
I think there are two parts. One is the looking ahead after Bowdoin. Part one is the need to constantly work with the community outside of Bowdoin. And I found a lot of freedom working outside the institutional structure of Bowdoin because it allowed for more genuine connections to be made across disciplines. And so when I was working with community groups, you could say I was mostly doing theater of the oppressed, using human sculpture as a means of looking at moments of conflict in a particular issue, and then using an audience to help to problem solve this moment of conflict by bringing out the voices in all of the sides of the conflict, so you could easily empathize with why people would make certain decisions. So that was my impetus of working with the community, and the community was open to that and much more able to bring real matters to the table than when I worked merely with Bowdoin students. There seemed to be an importance of mixing the two groups of community members and students. And sometimes it happens, and when it happened and when it did, it was beautiful when community members and students came together to look at an issue. But most of the time it didn't. And I think after a while I realized that the resources and the interchange was much more valuable outside of the campus, because there's so much richness in Maine's communities. There's so many people who really want to help each other. So I think I took that with me onward. And when I was applying for fellowships, I immediately picked one that allowed me to bring in these unusual ideas. And so I applied for something called the Watson Fellowship, and Watson is the same Watson as Thomas J. Watson, who built IBM. And his philosophy was, to grow, you really have to fail. He said, if you want a formula for success, let me tell you, it's to double your rate of failure. Then you'll find success, which is such a non-American thing to say, because there's so many the myth about success in the United States is so strong, and that people need to achieve that no matter what. It's very pervasive. But this Watson Foundation was saying, no, we're going to fund you for a whole year, as long as you can tell us what you're really passionate about, and you can prove to us that you've been doing it for a while, and you have, Watson candidates have moxie. So I guess like the drink here.
A Maine drink, yeah.
And so I went abroad for a whole year, and from the United States, and to places that I hadn't been before. That was another condition of the fellowship. And I looked at how theater and the physical arts, anything to do with your body, would awaken civic engagement. So how people would participate more in their community.
Where did you go during that year?
Yeah, I spent 4 months in Japan, a month in Bangladesh, a couple weeks in Thailand, Vietnam, 3 weeks in South Korea, and my final months in Australia. So really covered a lot of
What'd you learn?
Asia.
Give us one or two examples of something you learned during that time.
Well, I think what I learned was manifold, but the one story I always tell people was that you should always expect the unexpected. So there's this shaman on an island community, and it could be he or she, but let's just use he for now. He was conducting a ritual on the beach, and halfway through he looked out onto the shore and he saw these boats, and immediately he knew that those boats were the boats of the explorers. He had never seen one before, but he somehow knew that these are the explorers. They're looking around, they're traveling the world to see what it's like. Let me go and call the people to come and see this, because this might be a new era. And so he brings the people to the beach, and they look out to the horizon. They're all looking, and they say, where are the boats? We don't see anything. And then the shaman says, there they are, they're right there. And my interpretation of this story is, there are many interpretations, and one is that maybe the shaman is on some kind of hallucinogenic, which maybe allows him to see something else.
He had a vision.
He had a vision, but also maybe his imagination was able to see things that he hadn't seen before and make room for that. And I think when you travel, or even in your little communities, when you step outside your routine, and you interface with the unexpected, maybe you find something new.
So let's get down now to this question. Here you attend an elite college at Bowdoin, but you work in the community. Unlike almost all Bowdoin students, they don't really do it the way you did, as much as you did, as long as you did. You did it during your entire career. You participated in so many different aspects of local communities across the state. You became very well known with people all over the state. Your parents came to visit. They fly into Maine. They arrive about 3 in the morning, I remember, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, you brought them up to Orono and to join a peace walk. They hadn't slept in
That's right.
two
Probably
days.
2 days.
I mean, it was. This is the way you
It's a
you
little
worked,
cruel of
you
me.
know. But and they were great. And that night we had a potluck at a church, and they slept during the potluck.
That's right. Yeah.
But this is what you did. But what did you learn about the American people? What did you see? What did you experience about the American people that shocked you, surprised you, disappointed you? There has to be something there. And I'm not asking you to criticize the American people, but I'm asking you to reflect and to share what you saw. It would help us, I think, hear that.
Yeah, I think the image that comes up for me as you say this is a rehearsal for a street theater looking at the issue of drone usage by the American government in other countries. And for this street theater to work, we needed several components, several groups of people to work together well, in sync. There was a group of people who were the drones and had drone puppets, and they were to march into a group of civilians. And within that, there was a soundscape, 2 soundscapes, a drum to mark time, and a buzzing noise, which is what civilians hear when there's a drone above head. And so there were 4 groups, a buzzing noise, a drum, the civilians, and the drones marching in. And to orchestrate this, we had a little rehearsal. And I remember my jaw dropping during the rehearsal when I realized that people weren't very good at looking at another person and mirroring them. They couldn't be in time with another person. And so I found myself having to teach timing in the body through various movement activities of starting and stopping.
But your point is that...
My point is that it seemed to me that there was some gap in the education system that didn't allow people to inhabit their bodies in a way that would be in sync with another person.
Previously, I think you'd used the expression, when we talked a little bit about this, that you didn't think Americans knew how to work in groups very well.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in this particular setting, it seemed that way.
And that, I would venture to say, I think it's true. I think that's why we have so many churches, in every town, We don't work very well together. And it's, I think, a lot because we've created this culture of isolation, of every man for himself, dog-eat-dog culture, where, the success mythology that we kind of referred to earlier is one of the linchpins of it. One of the girders of success mythology is do it on your own. Everybody do your own thing, which is anti-group, working in community. There's a famous book. What was it called? Bowling Alone or something like that by Thomas Franks about Kansas, or I forgot the name of it. But anyway, he describes this whole thing that Americans just don't join anything anymore because this isolation, success mythology has gotten into the core of our being.
Right, and I would think that it's not even about joining something. It's about being with other people and being able to see when your neighbor needs help in a way that they need it, not how you presume them to be. So there's just a lack of being able to see what other people are going through.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that?
I think I would say that in order to have connections with the people around you, there needs to be an openness. And so I really question the need for political correctness, the need to have a strong and very stable view about somebody's political stance on something. So I would say when you let go of a definite construction of identity, then you make room for more nurturing connections. And this is what actually American neuroscientists say. If you want to look up Daniel Siegel, he's a famous neuroscientist who works with looking at what happens between people. What is the interpersonal neurobiology of human relations? And that's what he says. When you allow identity to relax for a little bit, then maybe you're able to connect more and have not only a connection but a nurturing connection. And I think that's what sustains us as people, nurturing connections.
So you're saying there's an identity crisis in America?
It's the opposite, is that there is no crisis when there should be. People should question why are people not having identity crises. Does that make sense? So people are so rooted in a fixed definition of self, like I'm Republican or I'm a Democrat or I'm this, and they really box themselves in.
They become rigid.
Yeah.
They become rigid within that box.
Yeah.
And they're not able to reach out beyond it. They're not able to identify with other people.
Yeah.
Am I right about that?
Yeah.
And so therefore that has an impact on being able to be a part of a group or being able to be part of, reach out to new people and that kind of thing?
It would really hamper a person's capacity for nurturing connections.
And so as a person come to college from another country, you walk into this culture and you must have seen that frequently, right?
Yeah. Yeah, people always speak a little too fast. They speak faster than they actually think, and they don't really take the time to connect. And even at an elite institution like Bowdoin, people speak too quickly, and they don't really see what's going on. There's so much data being exchanged, but not enough information. So it's just an overload rather than an understanding.
Well, we only have a minute left. Probably the most important question I have for you is that since you've come to the United States, you've become a bit of a, I hate to say it, Boston Red Sox fan.
I forgot to bring my cat.
Even though I tried to steer you toward my team, the Baltimore Orioles, you rejected that.
Yeah.
So tell us quickly, who are your favorite Boston Red Sox players and why?
We have to say for the last couple of nights, the Sox have scored 5 runs against the Orioles.
Yeah.
I know. And it's because, well, let's just say it's not because. I just have to say, I really like Pedroia, to answer your question. He's very steady. You can always count on Pedroia. I like Big Papi because he just has that heart. And I also, if I had a beard, I would try and make it very
a beard?
Yeah, if I had a beard, I
Make
would
it
try.
like Papi's?
Yeah, I would have that little line there that he has. And of course, nobody can speak about the Red Sox without talking about Mookie Betts.
Ah,
So those are my top 3.
all right. Well, incredible. You become more Americanized than you realize, right?
That's right. You got it.
Well, Phui Yi, thank you so much, and good luck to you. You're here for another month or so, and then you're heading back to Malaysia to take on your first job as a teacher, right? What are you going to be teaching?
I'm teaching high school performing arts and literary studies.
All right. Well, good luck to that. And we're going to miss you a lot here in Maine. You've earned your way into the hearts of many Mainers, but good luck.
I'm going to miss you in Maine too, Bruce.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.